My wife runs away with my brother during our honeymoon, and then they have the nerve to ask for my help. What they didn't know is that I would make them live the hell they deserve for betraying me like that. How the hell did I end up here? That's the cursed question that's been tormenting me for weeks. And I don't ask it because I lack clarity. I know exactly how it happened. What I don't understand is how I was so blind. How I allowed my life to crumble so quickly and in such a humiliating way. Let me give you some context. Because yeah, this isn't a pretty or inspiring story. It's a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. I married the woman of my dreams, or so I thought. I married someone who promised me love, loyalty, a life together. And what did I get? A betrayal so vile that I couldn't have imagined it even in my worst nightmares. And the cherry on top, the betrayal didn't come from a stranger. No, it came from someone of my own blood. My damn brother. Yes, that's right. My brother. My supposed best friend. My confidant. The guy who was supposed to always have my back. Well, guess what? Turns out that while I was busy planning my perfect life with my wife, those two were busy planning something else. Something that would shatter me into pieces. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you how it all started, because when I think about it, every detail feels like an open wound. The wedding was perfect. Well, at least I thought so at the time. It was the happiest day of my life. She looked radiant, like something out of a dream, in that white dress that made her seem like an angel. I was proud, excited, ready to start our life together. How could I not be? I had found the woman I thought was destined for me. My brother, of course, was there. As always, making himself the center of attention with his jokes and his damn charisma. You know the kind of person I'm talking about? The ones who always have everyone's attention. That was his specialty, and I always let him have it. After all, he was my brother, right? But now, looking back, I see the signs. God, they were so obvious it hurts to admit it. The little touches, the lingering glances. Those damn moments between them that I brushed off as nonsense. What an idiot I was. I remember one night, weeks before the wedding. We were all at a family gathering. She was sitting next to me, but somehow, she seemed more interested in what he had to say than in anything I was doing. She laughed at his jokes like they were the funniest thing in the world. And him, well, he seemed to enjoy it far too much. Something inside me told me something was off, but I ignored it. I thought, you're being paranoid. Smile and move on. So I did. And so did they. Then the honeymoon came. The start of our new life together, I told myself. We had booked a luxury resort on a paradise island. The kind of place that makes you feel like the rest of the world disappears. First, everything seemed perfect. But little by little, the cracks started to show. The first day was magical. We walked along the beach, drank cocktails under the sun, and immersed ourselves in that bubble of happiness I believed was real. But then, on the second day, something changed. She was distracted. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. And although she told me they were messages from her family, something felt off. Her smile wasn't the same, and I, stupidly, convinced myself it was just post-wedding stress. What a damn fool. The night that destroyed everything started like any other. We were having dinner at a romantic restaurant at the resort. Candles, soft music, everything you could imagine. She barely spoke. Her eyes were glued to her phone. I asked if something was wrong, and she said she was looking at wedding photos her mother had sent her. Lies, nothing but lies. Later that night, I woke up to find the bed empty. I looked at the clock, 2 a.m. My heart started to race. I looked for her in the bathroom on the balcony, but she wasn't there. I thought maybe she had gone for a walk, so I threw on a shirt and went to look for her. The resort was silent, with only the sound of the waves in the background. I walked through the gardens, the beach, even the lobby, but there was no sign of her. Finally, after almost an hour, I returned to the room. And there, on the table, was her phone. I'm not the kind of person who goes through other people's stuff, but something inside me was screaming to do it. So I unlocked it. And what did I find? Messages. Dozens of messages. And not just any messages. They were from my brother. Have you told him yet? I can't wait to be with you. Tell me when and where, and we'll leave everything behind. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The room was spinning. My brother. My brother. This couldn't be real. I read and reread the messages, hoping to find some logical explanation. But there wasn't one. It was exactly what it seemed. A betrayal. Not just from her, but from him too. The door opened, and there she was. She walked in with that damn calmness, as if she hadn't done anything wrong. "What are you doing awake?" she asked, her voice calm, almost bored. I didn't answer. Instead, I held up the phone and showed it to her. "Explain this," I said, my voice trembling with anger and pain. Her face changed. For a second, I saw something that might have been guilt, but it quickly turned into something else. Resignation, like she had been expecting this moment. "Fine," she said finally. "It's true. I love your brother. We never should have gotten married."
I'm sorry.
"Sorry?" That was her response.
No tears, no begging.
Just a dry, "I'm sorry." I stared at her, unable to process what was happening. And then she dropped the final bomb. "He's outside, waiting for me. We're leaving now." I stood there paralyzed. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just collapse to the floor. She packed her things with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. Before she left, she stopped at the door and said, "I hope you can forgive me someday." And just like that, she walked out the door. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the room was crushing. Reality hit me like a truck. My wife, the woman I had just married, had run off during our honeymoon. And not just that, she had done it with my own brother. My damn brother. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the phone in my hand, staring at the screen as if the words in those messages would change if I read them enough times. But they didn't. Nothing was going to change what had just happened. First came the pain, that unbearable stab in the chest that made me feel like my heart was being ripped apart. Then the confusion. How the hell didn't I see this coming? How did I let myself be fooled by the two people who were supposed to love me the most? And then, like a massive wave that engulfed me from head to toe, came the rage. A rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. In that moment, I stopped being the calm, reasonable man I had been my entire life. Something inside me shifted. I didn't want answers or apologies anymore. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel the pain they had caused me, to know what it was like to be betrayed like that. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this story end with them walking off happily into the sunset while I was left in ruins. I got up, still trembling from the adrenaline. I needed to get out of that room, out of that cursed place now tainted by their betrayal. I walked to the resort lobby, where the receptionist looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. I guess my face said it all. I asked for a copy of our stays bill. I wanted to see something, confirm my suspicions. And there it was. 2 taxi reservations under my wife's name. One to the airport and another to a nearby hotel. I smiled bitterly. They didn't even have the decency to go far. The audacity of those two was almost admirable. As I walked back to the room, my mind started plotting. I knew I couldn't just sit and let this pass. But I also knew I needed to be smart. If I was going to confront them, it had to be on my own terms. Revenge isn't about impulsiveness. It's about strategy. The first call I made was to my best friend, Lucas. He was the only person I trusted enough to tell what had happened. When I dropped the bomb, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Are you kidding me?" was the first thing he said, his voice full of disbelief. "I wish I was," I replied, my tone colder than I expected. Lucas was the kind of person who always knew exactly what to say in difficult moments, and that night was no exception. He reminded me that this wasn't my fault, that the betrayal was a reflection of them, not of me. But he also gave me a piece of advice I wouldn't forget. Don't do anything that drags you down to their level. Let them destroy themselves. Trust me, they will. That call was exactly what I needed to get moving. I knew Lucas was right. Couldn't let my anger blind me. But that didn't mean I was going to sit idly by. The next day, as I ate breakfast alone at the resort restaurant, I started planning. My first decision was to contact a lawyer. I didn't know if I needed one yet, but I wanted to be prepared. Then, I made sure to block both of them on social media and on my phone. I didn't want them to have access to me or my life. It was the first step in taking control. A couple of days passed before I heard from them. It was my mother who called me first, and her voice was full of concern. Of course, she didn't know anything. How could she? I told her we needed to talk in person, and 2 days later, I was sitting on the couch at my parents' house, facing the confused looks of my family. I told them everything without sugarcoating or leaving anything out. The wedding, the honeymoon, the messages, the escape. As I spoke, I could see disbelief turning into rage on my mother's face. My father, on the other hand, remained silent, his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the floor. When I finished, the silence in the room was deafening. "And now what?" That was all my father said, his voice low but filled with fury. That was the question, wasn't it? What was I supposed to do now? But before I could respond, the door flew open, and there they were. My brother and my wife, or should I say my ex-wife. They walked in as if nothing had happened, as if they weren't the most despicable people in the world. And when my mother saw them, she exploded. What followed was a scene that seemed straight out of a bad TV show. Screaming, accusations, fake tears. My brother tried to justify himself, saying that love can't be controlled, and that this was the best for everyone. She, on the other hand, barely spoke, keeping her eyes on the floor with an expression that might have been shame, though I doubt it. But the best part, what truly made that moment worthwhile, was when my father stood up. He walked over to my brother, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him toward the front door. And then, without a word, he threw him into the garden, right onto the thorny rose bushes my mother cared for so much. It was the most glorious moment of my life. When my brother got up, his hands covered in scratches and his pride in shreds, my father pointed a finger at him and said, "Don't ever set foot in this house again." Then he turned to my ex-wife and added, "And you, disappear from our lives." That was the last time I saw them together. But it wasn't the end, because if they thought they could just move on after what they did, they were sorely mistaken. My plan was just beginning. When I finally saw them disappear through the door, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel peace. I felt emptiness, as if my entire being was now solely devoted to understanding how we had ended up here. My brother, my damn brother, and the woman who swore she loved me. Together, the image of them holding hands, as if they were any ordinary couple, kept haunting me. But if they thought they could leave without consequences, they were going to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone they could trample on. The house was engulfed in tense silence after they left. My mother cried in the kitchen while my father sat on the couch. His face hardened, staring at the wall as if he could pierce it with his gaze. I was there, caught in a whirlwind of emotions ranging from fury to a bitter sort of resignation. But I wasn't going to let it end here. The first piece of the puzzle fell into place when I received a message from my lawyer. He had been working on the divorce papers and had good news. My ex-wife hadn't responded to any of the legal notices. That gave me the upper hand. I could proceed with the divorce unilaterally, which meant I would have the chance to set the terms. I had no intention of leaving her a crumb, and my lawyer, a man as relentless as he was efficient, agreed that was exactly what I should do. As the divorce progressed, another idea began to take shape in my mind. I knew that my brother and my ex were now living together. According to what a mutual friend told me, they had rented a small apartment in the city center. Of course, they weren't in a comfortable situation. My brother was drowning in debt, and my ex-wife, who had never worked a day in her life, was beginning to realize that love doesn't pay the bills. That little piece of information was enough to ignite a fire in me. I couldn't let them just adapt and move on as if nothing had happened. Not after what they did to me. So, I decided that if the universe wasn't going to punish their betrayal, I would. I started with my brother. I knew he had been using a loan our parents gave him to start his own business, a tool shop that was barely staying afloat. My first visit was to one of the most important clients of his business, someone I also had a professional relationship with. I told him what had happened, without embellishments or lies, and ended with a simple request. If you can, take your business elsewhere. He doesn't deserve your support. The reaction was better than I expected. This client, a man of strong principles, assured me he would seriously consider my request. A couple of weeks later, my brother called me, furious, saying his business was losing clients and that he knew I had something to do with it. I didn't deny it. I coldly told him he was tasting a small part of the poison he had poured on me. Meanwhile, my ex-wife wasn't doing much better. As the divorce moved forward, it became clear that she had no real financial resources. She was completely dependent on my brother, and according to rumors that reached me, their relationship was already starting to crack. Apparently, living in a small apartment, with mounting debts and not a cent to their name, wasn't as romantic as they had imagined. One day, my mother called me to tell me that my ex-wife had tried to contact my parents. She wanted to make things right with them, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding. But my parents, to my surprise and pride, told her off. My mother, who had been struggling with guilt for raising my brother as a spoiled narcissist, was determined to show me her support. And my father, well, my father remained the man of few words but decisive actions he had always been. His message to my ex was clear: don't come near my family again. While all this was happening, I kept moving forward with my life. I started focusing on my work, my friends, and rebuilding myself. But I couldn't help but keep track of my brother and ex's downfall. Every little setback they faced was a reminder that, while time can heal wounds, it also has a way of settling scores. The final straw came a few months later when my brother called me, practically begging for help. His business was on the brink of collapse, and my ex had left him, taking whatever little they had. According to him, she had decided she needed space to find herself. Of course, what she really wanted was to escape the misery she had gotten herself into. Hearing my brother beg for help was, in some way, poetic justice. I reminded him, with a calm tone laced with sarcasm, that he was the one who betrayed me first. "What did you expect? A happy ending?" I said, and I hung up the phone. Since that day, I haven't heard from my brother or my ex-wife. My life has moved on, and while the pain of their betrayal still haunts me at times, I find comfort in knowing that they're living the consequences of their own actions. It might not be perfect justice, but it's enough for me, because at the end of the day, I've learned that true strength isn't in destroying others, but in rising above them. As the months passed, the chaos my brother and my ex-wife left in the wake of their betrayal began to fade. My life, though marked by the scars of what happened, was entering a new phase. But the story wasn't over. There were still debts to settle, not just with them, but with myself. I needed to close this chapter once and for all. I focused on rebuilding my emotional stability and confidence. It was a slow process, filled with moments where I questioned everything, from how I had allowed those people to get so close to me, to whether I could ever fully trust anyone again. But with each passing day, I felt stronger. I did things I had put off for years. I traveled to places I always wanted to visit. I even started taking cooking classes, something I never thought I would enjoy so much. Still, the echo of what happened lingered in the background. I couldn't ignore that both my brother and my ex-wife were still part of my story, even if they were no longer part of my life. And while fate's justice seemed to be doing its job, I felt there was one final lesson they needed to learn. The coup de grace came when, by chance, I ran into a friend who worked at a local bank. During a casual conversation, he mentioned that my brother had applied for a loan to save his business, but had been denied due to his credit history. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't something I had any influence over, but it was a reminder of how his decisions were catching up with him. My friend told me something else interesting. My ex-wife, now completely isolated, had tried to reconcile with some of her old friends, but no one was willing to get close to her. Her reputation was in ruins. She was seen as someone willing to betray for convenience, and no one wanted to risk being the target of her next selfish move. Loneliness, it seemed, was her new companion. Although these details might have been enough for many, not for me. I knew there was still something I could do to ensure the lesson stayed with them forever. I decided to organize a family reunion, something I hadn't done since before the betrayal. I invited all my close relatives, except for my brother and, of course, my ex-wife. It was a simple yet warm event. We shared stories, laughed, and, for the first time in a long while, I felt the true meaning of family. During that gathering, I took the opportunity to share my version of what had happened. Without resentment or drama, I simply laid out the facts, letting everyone form their own opinion. The response was unanimous. My relatives offered me their support, and while some were already aware of what had happened, many others were shocked by the magnitude of the betrayal. The impact of that gathering was greater than I expected. News of the reunion and what I shared quickly reached the ears of my brother and my ex-wife. My mother, who had been one of the few to initially try to mediate, confessed to me that my brother had called furious, accusing me of tarnishing his name. But I didn't care anymore. His name was tarnished because he had dirted it himself. What truly marked a turning point was what happened a few weeks after the reunion. I received a call from my brother. It wasn't the arrogant or demanding tone I was used to. It was the voice of a defeated man. He begged me to help him, not for himself but for his children. He said they were going through hard times, that he could barely support them, and that they needed my help. That call hit me in an unexpected way. Not because I felt compassion for him, but because, for the first time, I saw a hint of humanity in his words. But I knew I couldn't give in. I couldn't reopen that door. I responded calmly, explaining to him that I had done my part to protect myself, and that now it was his responsibility to face the consequences of his actions. Maybe now you understand what it feels like to lose everything because of someone you trusted, I said before hanging up. It was a brief conversation, but I felt like it closed a chapter. Finally, it was time to face myself. I had spent so much time focusing on them and their downfall that I realized I needed to let go of all the weight I was carrying. I gathered all the photos, memories, anything that had any connection to my ex-wife or my brother, and packed them up. Some I burned. Others I placed in a box and tucked away in the back of a closet. Not because I wanted to forget them, but because I didn't want them to control my present. Life after the storm was clearer than I had expected. I began to look at the future with optimism, something I hadn't felt in years. The true closure wasn't seeing how they fell apart, but realizing that, despite everything, I was still standing. I had survived what I thought was insurmountable, and at that moment, I made a promise to myself that I would never again allow anyone to trample on my dignity. Betrayal is a double-edged sword. It cuts you, it hurts you, but it also teaches you. And I learned not just about them, but about myself. I am stronger than I thought, and I know that no matter what happens, I will always be able to rise. My brother and my ex-wife became a lesson, and although I will never forgive them, I will not allow them to define who I am. That, in the end, is the true victory.